today we're going to go on a journey into darkness. We're going to go into the ruthless, cold world of organized crime and the Italian mafia. We're going to go behind the curtain and speak to a member of a family, a famous mafia family, to see what drives people into that life. Coming next. Today, my guest is Jimmy Alite, the brother of John Alite, who was a famous Gambino Crime Family enforcer, you know, and certainly convicted killer who turned his life around. But Jimmy Alite, welcome to the platform.
Thank you very much for having me on, Stephen. Good to be here.
Yeah, now many people are fascinated, Jimmy, about how people can be driven into a life like that, a life where death can come at any moment, or imprisonment, or worse, right? So we're going to go back to the start. Now, we've got a lot of big names to talk about here. You know, we're going to be talking about John Gotti Jr., Sammy the Bull Gravano, Michael Frances, people like Jimmy Burke, who was in, you know, of course, was portrayed in Goodfellas after the Lufthansa heist. Names like this, who you grew up with. But we're going to go back to the start. What was your family like then, growing up in Queens, in New York?
I grew up in an extended family. So we had, my grandfather had come here from Albania, and he bought a house in Queens, which was a kind of like a blue collar, working class area. And I grew up with uncles and aunts and, you know, in one big house. So it was a very busy house with men were very macho, women kind of like had their place and men had their place. So it was kind of divided between the men and the women. And that's pretty much it. You know, I would say we grew up very sort of Italian American, if you had to say. Even though I was Albanian, seemed to be that I mean, that's relatable to most people when they hear sort of like Italian American. A little atypical Italian American, but sort of Italian American.
Okay, was it a loving family, Jimmy? I mean, mother, father, was it a loving family? Was there other issues in the family at that time growing up?
Yeah, it was a very aggressive family. There was a lot of love, but there was also a lot of aggression. And, you know, it was, I guess you want to say it was normal to me, but, you know, looking back and comparatively to other people's lives, it was very aggressive. So there was a lot of, you know, domestic aggression in the family, verbally and physically. And there was also a lot of, there was a lot of love too. There was a lot of, you know, caring and love. So it was a little of both. It was a mixed bag of nuts.
So, you know, to paint a picture, because we really want to get to the humanness and the drivers for the audience out there, so they understand better the picture. I'm sure many will identify with the journey, Jimmy. So did the aggression come from your father mainly? I mean, did he drink? Did he gamble? Did he work too hard? Was he moody, or was it? Yeah. How did that play out? You know, in the family dynamic.
Yeah. So my father was a non-alcoholic alcoholic, if you know what I'm saying. He was very aggressive. He was a big, huge gambler. Actually, my uncles, I had an uncle that lived downstairs and an uncle that lived upstairs. My uncle that lived upstairs was actually a first cousin, but he was older, so we called him uncle. It was anyone older than us that lived with us was an uncle, and it was called an uncle. And they gambled a lot. My father was very aggressive. Yes, he was a fighter. He was a hot-tempered guy. He gambled. So he'd come home in a pissed off mood, and you'd watch your ass. You know you'd have a problem, you know, crossing the lines with him.
So you're walking on eggshells, like basically,
pretty
yeah.
Much. Yeah, you are walking on eggshells. That's a good word. You're walking on eggshells. And my mom was, she was a little like she let my father do his thing, and she was mostly with the girls, and you know, she wasn't as nurturing as like a typical Italian mother would be. She was more an Albanian mother's. I don't know how most Albanian mothers are, but my mother was more. She had a little bit more stoicism to her. She was a little bit more stoic with us. She was warm occasionally, but she was mostly she was good, but she just wasn't that nurturing type.
So she was, I'm guessing she was tough too. These was tough times. You know, she
Yeah,
had
she was tough.
a tough
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
children to bring up in a tough environment, tough husband. So, you know, I'm guessing she was, you know, a wonderful feminine behind that, but the environment's made her tough. So her stoicism was her toughness and her kind of defense. Would that be right, Jim?
I would think you're right. And she had a lot of, you know, she would have her own mood swings and her own deal to deal with. And you're right. You know, just growing up in that area, growing up, you know, in a large house, she didn't have her own house. So I mean, and she worked. She worked a full-time job, part-time and full-time. So we grew up really basically with my father and my mother both kind of working. So we didn't grow up in a typical, you know, your mom's home kind of situation. My mom was out working. So it was a little different than most people, I would say. At that time anyway, growing up in that time era. Now everything has changed.
It's great to understand what it was really like for you guys, because your brother would go on to be a influentially positioned enforcer, mob killer within the Gambino crime family at a time that it was really hitting the headlines, you know. John Gotti Sr., the Teflon Don, all this stuff that was going on in New York, you know, at that time, and his son, John Jr. You went a completely different way. Now, I know you got such a big story yourself, Jimmy, and we're going to go to that because that's just, if not more, fascinating about how you brothers was molded within that environment. So, what was it like outside then for you guys? You know, at that time, growing up.
Yeah, we grew up. You know, we grew up around the mafia. So you got to remember. So my mother's side, my grandfather on my mother's side was basically an Albanian mafia. So he had a gambling joint in Pittsburgh. She grew up in Pittsburgh. So he had his own gambling joint. He had problems. He was involved in murder, and so we grew up on her side with that kind of Pittsburgh, you know, Albanian, and they were around the Italians too, but Albanian sort of mafia. And then you had my father who grew up with Red Kelly and you know, Handsome Jack and uh, Albert Anastasia's cousin. So Blackie, he was with the Gambino crew. So my father grew up with a lot of guys that were made guys, and he hung out with them. So did my uncles. So we were around this mafia stuff our whole lives. We used to go to gambling dens where it was all mafia, and guys would, you know, we would give the guys sodas, and you know, and we were little kids, and the guys would give us $5, you know, tips and stuff like that. So we grew up in that whole mafia genre. Now we also had another side where we were athletes, and so we kind of were very eclectic, Steve, as kids. I think that most people that knew us would say, you know, we fit in different areas. You know, we hung out with preppy kids, we hung out with wild kids, we hung out with athletes because I was a big athlete. My brother not so quite as big, but he was an athlete. So we really kind of ran the gamut, to be honest with you. But underneath all that, there was a you know, you grow up in this kind of environment, and there's an underlying rage that's in you, and that rage comes up as you start getting older, and depending on your environment, it could be a very explosive situation.
We're gonna get into the rage, Jimmy. First, I want to ask, thanks for that, right? That paints a picture.
Yeah.
So your father, what was his instruction to use? Was it, hey, stay away from them guys because they do this, and I don't want you to go down that path, or these guys are all right and these are my friends and this is how we live? What was his main fundamental instruction to you, to his own sons growing up at that time, at what path you should take?
Yeah. So he wasn't really, I mean, he wanted us to be professional athletes, boxers, or any kind of professional athlete, basically boxing and baseball. But we played everything. I was probably more natural as a football player and boxer than anything else. But he wanted us to be fighters, tough guys. My father was very paranoid. I don't want to use the word paranoid, but he's very aggressive. And his thing was that the world was full of bullies and that we had to stand up to bullies. Now, he never impressed upon us to be bullies ourselves. But what he said was, if someone ever comes up to you and bullies you, be ready. And he readied us for that through boxing and through fighting and through just his demeanor and how we're supposed to handle ourselves. So growing up in an environment that was extremely volatile and an aggressive environment, I mean outside in the neighborhood, in the schools that we went to, we couldn't walk away from situations like other guys. We had to, get involved in all the way and fight because our pride wouldn't let us. The way we were brought up couldn't let us walk away. So let me give you an example. If there was a situation where you could have walked, where maybe 9/10 of my friends would walk away, I would have to stay and handle it, because if I didn't, I would feel like less of a man. So so if the situations arise every day where people are challenging you, especially if you're smaller in size, and I was a bit shy in school. I was very aggressive when I played sports, but when I was not playing sports, I was very withdrawn and shy. And so people would test you a lot, especially if you were small, which I was on the smaller side as a kid.
So this is the father, just to come in there, this is the father that will put you up the front. So the programming is already starting. This is how we do things. We don't walk away. If someone kind of faces you down, you can't run away from it. You have to fight. You have to step forward. And if you don't, you can't come back to me with that, because I'm going to walk you down the road and I'm going to stand there while you fight this guy and while you sort it out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it ever came to that, and I don't think he ever said those words. It was just innate that we knew we'd be disappointing ourselves and him if we didn't. So I don't think my father was a hard liner, like, if you don't finish this, I'm going to kick your ass. Not that kind of thing. It was more like it was expected, and it was so ingrained in our DNA that there was no discussion about it. It was just a matter of, this is the way it's going to work. This is the way it goes. And, after a while, you're like a sponge. You just pick that up and you do what you have to do. It's not even a question of not doing it. It's because it's become who you are. And I guess it was a disappointing thing.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. So you talked about the rage, Jimmy, right? That rage, right? Now, I can understand what it is to live a life like that, but that rage, that violence, for you, I know your brother, he certainly turned out, he was convicted of murder, certainly, been accused of many, many more murders. For you, this violence, this rage, where did it come from, Jim?
I think it came from the fact that when I was younger, there was a push to not only fight for yourself and fight against the bullies, and there was a push to always be on top, to always be a winner in sports, and to be very aggressive. And I think that, like I said, being smaller in size, you were challenged a lot. And I think the rage also comes from that, but I also think it comes from my father. And there's a certain rage in you that, given the right circumstances in life, it's going to ignite. And, when I watch, when I talk to different people and I see it, you either have that rage in you or you don't. It's either there, and that there's certain characters in certain movies where you could see that rage. If you see like Goodfellas or something like that, or certain mafia movies, whether it's The Godfather, certain characters have that rage. And the best thing you could do with that rage when you're having it is try to control it a little bit. It's very hard to control. But I was better able to control the rage than Johnny. And
Yeah,
I also figured out.
Yeah, this is a good thing because it has been said that both of you have this rage, right? Both of you had that rage. Like, we're going to talk a little bit more about your brother. So you say that the difference was you controlled it or had a handle on it more than John, Jim.
Correct. John, I mean, and then also with time, I was able to let the rage go. Like if an incident happened, with time, I'm a very forgiving guy. I forgave a lot of people for a lot of things. So John, not so quite, not so forgiving. And also in the moment, I only did what was necessary to be done for the most part. Where John would go the extra mile if we got into a situation or a fight. So in other words, if a guy did something that caused this much harm to me, I give him that much harm back, maybe a little bit more. Where John would go the extra mile and and do a lot worse. So, I would really kind of keep it straight. If a guy did this to me, I do that to him. If he did more than that to me, I do a little bit more. But John would go over and above. Where I kind of kept it like, yeah.
We're going to come in now and we're just going to show some stuff. I've got some stuff here. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, Jim. Show some stuff here with John, at the Ravenite with organized crime figures like John Gotti Sr.'s in there, John Gotti Jr. There's other mob figures in there. You're talking about John and the rage. You controlled it more, and John was more. You painted a picture that John couldn't control it as much, and it'd always go further. So, what was it like as the two brothers between you two then, when you're kind of coming up? Them teens going into them early years. How was that for you two guys? You used to fight all the time, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, we fought. I mean, against each other, but we fought other guys too, and. We had this, winner's mentality. I mean, we grew up with a winner's mentality in sports and everything else. I hated to lose. So I would do anything to win in sports, whether it was boxing or football or, there was nothing I wouldn't do to win. I don't mean cheat. I mean, in terms of being aggressive, cheating. I just had that winner's mentality. Johnny had that to a certain degree, but I think Johnny's went more towards fighting than in sports. So between me and John, we definitely had that competitive streak, and I think we did tangle a lot. But it was done. We always made up. We loved each other, and I would never do anything to hurt my brother or vice versa. In terms of, we knew where to end, where to stop things. We didn't go past a certain point with each other.
Here's the question. As two brothers, I have brothers too, Jimmy. Who used to win more often than not? Or was it 6-1 and half a dozen of the other?
Yeah, I think there was a little. I mean, when I was younger, I was a year older than him, so I won. He was my younger brother, so we didn't fight as much. I think as we got a little older, things started evening out more. And it was like six half dozen the other. It was usually got started and somebody did something and it went on for a while, then it was broken up. It was, one of those things.
So what was it like for you? You know, we're going to put some more pictures in there just to set the scene for the viewers of, you know, some other current mob pictures of the time, you know, with your brother, with, you know, some certain other organized crime figures. You know, you got people there like Anthony Ruggiano, Fat Andy, Ruggiano,
Yeah.
of course, who was a, you know, a close associate of John Gotti's, influential Gambino organized crime figure, people you would have grown up with. So what was,
Right.
when did you start thinking that John was going off the rails, Jim? Or did he keep stuff from you? Or was this just a normal progression of things? How did that work?
Yeah, I think it was a normal progression. I think John started changing at about, I want to say 15, I think. I mean, we did things together prior to that. And then we were a little wild and we did things together. And then there was a certain point where John started getting more aggressive and doing things on his own, where I was more into sports. I wanted to be a boxer or even different sports. I was really a natural athlete. So I think John started on his own 15 to 16-ish. He started branching out and doing things on his own more. And there was a little difference between me and him.
Now, look, you know, we can all see it's well documented that he was right in the middle of, you know, the Gambino crime family, which was the most powerful at that time of the 5 New York families. And he was, you know, he was very aligned, you know, certainly with John Gotti Jr. So he was very close to the power base, you know, but very quickly at an early age. Did you know this? Was this evident?
I didn't really know it because, to be honest with you, I was going through my own turmoil at the time. So 17-ish, or right around 17 and a half, as he's becoming more well-known. And, you know, I had a reputation too. At a certain point, I became anorexic. So for 2 years or thereabouts, I was anorexic, and that didn't happen because I wanted to be thinner or anything like that. It was an emotional thing and a physical thing. And so at that time, I was pretty much homeward bound, and John was out doing his thing. So this is where John really progressed when I wasn't in the picture. And I didn't really know. No, I didn't know everything that was going on at the time. I started hearing things, and me and John kind of lost our closeness for that couple of years while I was going through that difficult period. You want to say that anorexia?
Now I know, Jimmy, you have an unbelievable story yourself. How it just goes to show we've painted the environment, the intensity of everything, and the tools you had to work with. But how one brother can be right in the center of organized crime at the sharp end, you know, to turn out to be a mob killer, when another brother from the same environment can turn out to be a CEO and do other wonderful things, but have other wonderful challenges and get over them too. Now, I'm really looking forward to getting into that, and we're going to talk about that in part 2.